Put this guy here.
That's well, that guy's going to go right, and that's what I was looking at right here.
You know what's crazy?
This is going to go in here. That'll go this way.
With how?
Sam's Garage is brought to you by NHOU. On this episode, Sam and Kevin Ford complete the Flexolite radiator and fan installation in the Project Jeep TJ Rock Crawler. Sam and Doug Harris get to work on the front suspension of the Alpha 1 GTO project. Next, Sam starts working on the LS3 engine bottom end, held together with ARP bolts. Then installs the camshaft from Livernois Motorsports. On this episode, Sam and Kevin Ford complete the Flexolite radiator and fan installation in the Project Jeep TJ Rock Crawler.
Okay, today we're going to be tackling one of the most important parts of any project, and that is going to be the cooling system. Now, anytime you have a custom application like this Jeep, if you've noticed that there is nothing but openness up here, we've removed all the cladding that directs the air naturally going into the radiator, and it's gone now. So we have to come up with some good cooling to take up for that.
Yeah, we want to get as big of a radiator as we can into a small space. I mean, Jeeps don't have a lot. We've put a big engine, lots of horsepower. We're going to be off-road, sitting a lot. So we're not going to get that natural airflow from cruising. So we want to make sure we got a big, nice fan that can move the air through and keep us from overheating.
Yep, and a good idea in this case is to put yourself a 160 or a 180 thermostat like what Travis likes using. Now, it's important that you pick the right radiator for something like this because you got 3 to 4 row on this particular radiator, aluminum construction, and you look at the fan shroud, it completely covers the surface area of the radiator, giving you the maximum cooling. And like Kevin said, when you're idling like we're going to be, we need all that power we can get.
Yeah, that's right. So the biggest thing is getting this into this small package, creating our brackets, getting everything mounted securely, because the other part of off-roading is it's rough on stuff, you know? We want to make sure it's secure.
Absolutely, and we're going to have to do a little bit of a JDM lean to the radiator.
That's right.
I can't wait. Okay, we got the grill back in place. Now we're going to see if the radiator fits and what kind of bracket should we have to come up with. We're
trying to stay below this top line so we clear the hood, and we're trying to make sure we clear those brackets.
And then we have to keep in mind that which should be clear because the front of the hood has some girth
like
to
a bulk,
it.
yeah.
Yep. So we have to make sure that we stay away from that. And we're tilted black, so what we're going to do is we're going to make some brackets right here off the roll cage. We're going to tack them in place because we don't have our accessory drive yet, and we don't want to make anything permanent just yet.
That's right. We want to do that and make sure we're happy with the brackets, and we'll figure out how we're going to brace them and just weld them up when we're all done.
Okay, so now we're going to take the radiator out and make some brackets.
Yeah.
Now, you know, this cardboard gives us good protection while we're doing any kind of mock-up on a radiator.
Yeah, I mean, as careful as you want to be, you can knock those fins over, especially on an aluminum radiator like this, and then, you know, it just doesn't look good.
Yep, and it doesn't flow as well. And anytime you guys are cutting something like what we're doing here, don't go crazy and cut everything off. Cut a little bit off at a time so that you can get good clearance, because there may be a time where you don't have to cut everything off. We were able to save this bottom part and keep the integrity in the grill.
Yeah, it keeps our mounting point now. Like if we had to cut this whole thing off, we'd have to refigure the mounting, but this is going to work out good. We'll check it and make sure, and then we'll get to the tabs.
What we're going to do, we're going to loosely bolt it in, test fit the radiator, and see what kind of mounts we have to make for it.
Now I found some of the factory hardware had a hard time going in and out of these, so we retapped them and used actually some bolts out of an LS.
Yeah. That way it keeps it factory fresh.
Yeah.
But it's a good idea to always go back and tap things because this is older and rust builds up on the threads, then you start galling your hardware.
Absolutely.
Kevin, that is awesome. And also, we were able to get complete surface area as far as airflow goes through that grill.
Yeah, and we've got plenty of room with it raked back. It worked out really nice. It goes along with the shock towers. Kind of an accident, but you know, we'll take credit for it.
And you know what? We've got room for the accessories, like you said. We got room for a couple of coolers here because power steering is important. But in our case, because we're idling the engine, being a rock crawler, an engine oil cooler is also very important. And this is where you want to take your time and mock things up. Something like this, you saw we took it apart 3 or 4 times, but it takes that to get it done properly one final time.
Right, and we didn't have to go back and cut or replace the grill because we cut too much. Everything worked out well. The hardware went right back in. I mean, we're ready to move on to the next project.
This is definitely somewhere where you don't want to get lazy. Next thing we're going to do is install our worn winch.
Yep.
Sam's Garage is brought to you by NHOU. Sam and Doug Harris get to work on the front suspension of the Alpha 1 GTO project. This week, updated control arms are installed to help keep the front wheels pointed in the right direction. The control arms are a critical part of the suspension, connecting the chassis of the car to the steering knuckle.
We're about to upgrade the suspension and brakes on our 250, and we got some old school Daytons, and they're going to come with knockoffs. And tell us how to use that hammer and get them off.
Yeah, one of the important things, little tech tip here, is the tire rolls this direction. So when you're putting them on, you're always going the opposite direction. This has a right hand and a left hand thread. So when I go ahead and I'm going to start, let me find the right one here, and I'll start to go ahead and begin to loosen it up. You know, and if I hadn't been working out, this would be a real issue.
No
But
kidding.
when you got a set of these, you can do a set of these.
Makes it much easier. Now, when you don't have a set of those and you want to take them off in the future, it's very important that before you put on the knockoff, you put a little bit of anti-seize each time you service your wheels. That way the knockoff will always come off for you, regardless of how big your biceps are, okay? You go ahead and get that off. I'll go ahead and take this side off.
Sounds good, Sam.
You know, Doug, these lower arms and the trailing arms are going to really complement those coilovers. As you can see, we've eliminated the 2 joints, the 2 bushings right here at the frame. Yeah. We've got caster adjustment, we've got camber adjustment, and we got camber adjustment on the shock itself.
Yeah, just a little tech tip. When you're putting all of this stuff together, make sure you put it together loose. Make sure everything fits right. Just hand tight all the nuts and bolts, everything onto it. Otherwise, if you begin to tighten it and things aren't right, then you're tearing it apart and you don't really know. So make sure you just hand tighten everything, mock it all up before you start tightening.
Absolutely. And don't forget, anytime you guys are replacing something that's an alignment item, like this trailing arm, take it and mock it up with the original one to get you close to the alignment shop. Now, we're going to have to go back and put cotter pins in, but we're not doing that yet because we're going to get new inner and outer tie rods on this to complete the front suspension. And I'm also going to get new bearings for the spindles. So, but right now, we're good to go on the front and we can start to tackle the rear.
That sounds great.
And on the rear, we're going to be doing the differential, cross members, and a complete setup just like this on the rear. It's going to make it really handle around the corner.
Yeah, once again, it's going to give us all the adjustments that we need. Once we go ahead and get this out on the road and begin to put it through its paces, we'll know how we're going to need to set it up.
But we also trimmed weight. You know, not only does this suspension give us full adjustability, but the difference between the arm that the factory one is just a boxed in steel, stamped steel, it's going to have a lot of flex to it.
Right.
Whereas the aftermarket piece is a solid chunk of CNC machine billet aluminum, and it's going to give you no flex.
Yeah, and also the thing onto it, you can see on a piece like this where you have heim joints or where you have rubber, and you had rubber bushings up on the top, and so we've eliminated the rubber, And by doing that, takes all that flex out. Otherwise, you set your chassis, even though you do it, you go into a turn, the rubber begins to flex. And we want to eliminate, because we're going to be pushing this automobile.
Let's go ahead and tighten up all our bolts and we're ready to go in the rear.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm here with Joe DuPont, NH Oil Undercoating. And Joe, I've heard of restoration. If you've got a vehicle and you've neglected it, it's got some rust, what do you have for them?
So typically someone would come in, let's say with a 5, 6, 7-year-old vehicle, and they'll say, you know, gee, I heard about this now. I would like to protect my vehicle and begin an oil-based rust-proofing maintenance program. And so what we do is if they come in with a 7, 8-year-old vehicle, we'll take the rust down to a surface rust, and then we'll hit it with 2 coats of our own acid, which is basically going to neutralize that rust, okay? It's just the most aggressive approach we offer for beginning your program.
That's a great idea. And for those of you who purchased a used car that didn't have any undercoating on it, it's got some rust, but you want to be proactive and add some safety to that vehicle and add some value to that vehicle, the restoration is going to be a perfect example for you guys.
Sam's Garage is brought to you by NHOU. Next, Sam begins working on the LS3 engine, starting with the bottom end held together with ARP bolts.
We're going to have some fun today. We're going to do a budget LS3 build using ARP hardware and a Livernoid camshaft for some extra power. Now, what I mean by a budget build in this case is we're going to be using stock rotating assembly, but we're going to add some strength with ARP main studs, ARP rod bolts, and ARP head bolts. That's going to add a lot of strength to the rotating assembly of this engine, and the reason we need that strength is because we pro-charged this engine last year and added nitrous. So there's going to be a lot of cylinder pressure. And the one way you can gain reliability out of your stock LS motor, these things can handle 800 to 900 horsepower if tuned correctly. Now, from the factory, these things come with a ring gap of about 6 to 17 thousandths. When you're adding cylinder pressure in a case of a supercharger or a nitrous application, you're going to want to open up that end gap to about 24 to 25 thousandths. And that'll give you plenty of room for that ring to compress and expand without damaging the piston. What happens is that when the ring gap is too tight, the ends of the piston and ring touch, and then they start to lift. And it'll actually lift the ring lance, break the piston right off, creating a pocket of which then the combustion goes in there and destroys the piston further, grenading the motor. So we're going to add 25 thousandths ring gap to our motor. We're going to add ARP studs, giving it added strength, and those rod bolts are going to make sure that our rods don't come apart. What I've done is I put the crankshaft in the hole. Now, this is very important that when you guys are doing a build like this, I'm using aftermarket race bearings, and in there is a note that says on the thrust bearing there is 3 bearing surfaces right here, 3 grooves, and on the front there is 2 grooves, and it specifically says the 3 grooves go towards the back of the motor where the flex plate is. Now, there is a notch in this main cap. You really can't mess this one up, but you can't put the bottom one in backwards. I've installed a lot of bolts like this, ARP studs and main studs, and just a little bit of stud keeps the stud in place and you'll be good to go. Make sure that you use lube on the bolts anywhere there is a friction surface, on the bottom of the nuts or washers. This one's washer is incorporated in the nut, but you want to put it on the bottom surface, anywhere there is friction, and that'll ensure that you guys get a proper torque, making sure that you got good clamping force that's going to keep the engine reliable. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and install my nuts, finish torquing down the crankshaft, and we'll go ahead and install our pistons. We got the crankshaft all installed, all the bolts are torqued down to spec. Now we're going to go ahead and get ready to put our pistons in. I could use an old school ring compressor like you guys have seen many people use, just like this, but I love using the ARP sleeves that allow for the piston to slide in, compressing those rings, causing no damage. A lot of times, depending on the taper right here at the beginning of the cylinder, this particular spring compressor can cause a ring to actually get caught up right here at the edge, damaging the ring. Then you have to stop and go buy yourself another set of rings. With the ARP sleeve, it goes in like butter, 0 damage. Gapping our rings. In this particular case, our second ring has a dot on it and it's beveled. Very important, these go on the correct way. The top ring in this situation is not beveled on either side, so it can go on either way. There is no dot. So when you want to determine your end gap on your rings, what you do is you take your ring, put it in the hole, take your feeler gauge. In this case, I'm at 24 thousandths, and I got 24 thousandths clearance. Now what I like to do before I install the piston is I'll put a little bit of oil on the wrist pin itself. Then I'll put a little bit of oil in the cylinder wall itself, but I'm not going to put any oil in the ring lance because then that'll cause oil consumption in the future. Now, all that assembly lube you see me using on the hardware, and again I'm going to be using it on the head studs, is the real reason why you want to change the oil at 500 miles anytime you do an engine build. You want to get those contaminants out of the crankcase and any other debris that may have gone in there in the process of building it. Now let's add some horsepower by installing a Livernois Motorsports camshaft.
Sam's Garage is brought to you by NHOU. Next, Sam starts working on the LS3 bottom end, held together with ARP bolts. Then installs the camshaft from Livernois Motorsports.
We're going to be adding some horsepower to our engine build by installing a Livernois Motorsports camshaft. These high quality camshafts are made right here in America. Now they've got a lot of camshafts already on the shelf, but if you guys are building a custom car like my Cadillac, you can give them your specs and they'll build it to your needs. In this case, I don't want a rough idle, but I want to make the horsepower, so they're able to give me the lift and duration I need without that choppy idle since it is a Cadillac. Now, Livernois Motorsports Engineering is also known for solving your problems out there when you guys are making horsepower. For instance, your oil pump drive gears in your Ford modular motors. When you start to raise up the RPM, those gears will crack on you. They've made new billet gears to solve that problem. You guys with the 5.4 liter Triton Ford Excursions and Expeditions, you got cam phaser problems. Livernois Motorsports has a solution for that problem as well, but with their cam phaser lockout kits. Let's go ahead and install our camshaft and set up the timing. Now we're going to install this camshaft. We want to make sure that you lube the entire camshaft with assembly lube, and in this case I'm going to use 2 bolts to give me the leverage I need to keep that camshaft up so that I don't nick any bearings. And I did replace the bearings when I had the block line honed. And this is very important that when you guys are building yourself an engine like this is where you need to do some maintenance items. For instance, the LS engine across from 5.3 all the way to 7.0 is notorious for the oil pumps failing. So this is the perfect time to go ahead and put in a new oil pump. And I like to use the high pressure, high volume oil pump from Milling. Does a really good job, comes with separate springs for you to be able to tune in your oil pressure. So don't skip that step. This is the perfect opportunity that when you're installing your new camshaft that you go ahead and change out the timing chain along with the new tensioner if your engine is equipped with one. Now, there are 2 different camshafts that these LS motors come with. There's the later one that comes with a single bolt in the middle, and then you got the old school ones that come with the 3 bolt in the middle. This is the one you want. If your car is a newer model with this particular cam gear, when you order your camshaft with Livernois Motorsports, you want to ask for the 3 bolt. That's probably what they offer anyways. Get yourself a new cam gear, it's worth the added investment. That'll make sure that none of this hardware will loosen up on you and your cam gear won't fly off. Okay, we got the Livernois camshaft installed. Now this camshaft can make up to 140 horsepower at the wheels or 170 horsepower at the crankshaft, depending on your whole application. That's pretty healthy numbers for just a camshaft swap. Now when you're doing this, like I said, this is the perfect opportunity to go ahead and change out the timing components. The tensioner, if your engine is equipped with one, if you have a later model motor, and the timing chain and oil pump. All that is new, gives you some peace of mind. Save you labor down the road. Now the bottom end is completely assembled. We've got ARP bolts on our valley cover, and if you notice the valley cover is new because this was an L99 engine that I did an LS3 conversion on. So as you can see, 2 of the lifter buckets are old, 2 of the lifter buckets are new. That's because I have to change out 8 of the lifters to the LS3 style. Go ahead and change out the valley pan, completing your conversion. Next, all we gotta do is put on our Brodix heads, complete the long block, put it in the car and crank it up.
On this episode, Sam and Kevin Ford complete the Flexolite radiator and fan installation in the Project Jeep TJ Rock Crawler. New control arms were installed on the Alpha One GTO project. Then completed the bottom end assembly and installed the Livernois Motorsports camshaft in our LS3 engine build using ARP bolts.